as indigenous people believe that we are free in 2015. But the reality is that despite our economic status, despite our social status, despite our religious status, despite our degree of education, we still live under Caucasian authority. The sad thing is that there is no time we can point to in history in which we have been more of a voluntary slave than we are in 2015. Most of the so-called educated and so-called successful among us encourage the masses of our people to chase a more comfortable slavery experience. Well, some of us, myself included, will always remind our people that until we are no longer under European, white, or Caucasian authority in any way, we are still slaves to one degree or another. The Akawu states that those that have a proper knowledge of self are never satisfied with slavery as a permanent state of existence. So we want to read an excerpt out of the book Black Indians, A Hidden Heritage to give you some insight on how our ancestors that weren't satisfied with slavery as a state of existence lived independent of white authority. From the time of Columbus, the gravest threat to European domination of the Western Hemisphere came from outlaw communities of former slaves. These maroon colonies, as they were called, were considered a knife poised at the throat of the slave system. Some fearful Europeans saw them as a sword pressed against the entire colonial system in the Americas. Men and women who lived in them saw their settlements as the fulfillment of an American dream, a sheltered home in freedom. They were a place for families to educate their young, develop their agriculture and trade, practice religion, justice, and government. As outlaw communities, they operated in remote, difficult to find, and hard to defeat locations. Maroons considered each day of survival a small miracle and were thankful for each new dawn as free men and women. Some colonies were begun by a single African or so-called Indian, and others were the result of several or many slaves fleeing together. From their first day, maroon colonies faced enormous problems. They had to quickly find a safe location, plan a defense, feed and clothe their people, and plan the life of a stable community. Families meant that communities would last, remain at peace, and that their soldiers would fight harder because their loved ones and children were at risk. Fear of attack haunted every maroon settlement. It was a danger they could count on. The lack of food was their worst problem. They didn't even have time to clear and plant gardens to produce food. Remember, growing your own food is a revolutionary act. The whites were always pursuing and attacking. They slashed the crops to bits, ruining everything they saw. They set fire to everything they didn't want to carry off with them. Well, that enraged our early ancestors against the whites. The planning of defense and agriculture in most black Indian settlements drew largely on African models and experience. However, no type of influence was discarded, and these colonies grasped aspects of Indian, African, and even slave life considered vital for survival. The African influence was strongest in tropical maroon locations, and their African methods of planting, irrigation, and harvesting held sway under African-type governments. Africans, as experts on tropical agriculture, had a lot to teach both Indians and Europeans. A leading defense technique, which was planting sharp sticks in a pit and covering it with thick grass to trap intruding armies was African. It not only inflicted terrible damage, but terrified any invading army with the thought that a sudden painful death could occur at any moment. These pits were almost impossible to detect. Men and women who once were starved and beaten by masters grew strong and vigorous in these hidden communities. Maroon settlements took such daring names as God Knows Me and None Else, Disturb Me If You Dare, Come Try Me If You Be Men, and I Shall Murder Before I Shall Be Taken. Maroon self-esteem seemed to grow with each month of liberty. It also sprang from the knowledge that Europeans were often afraid to march out and challenge their community's defenses. Maroon music also reflected the confidence settlements had in their military strength. A maroon song, preserved for generations, assured villagers their enemies were doomed. Black man, rejoice. White man won't come here. And if he does, the devil will take him off. Maroon culture drew from the experiences of Africa's nations, Native Americans, and what each of these peoples learned about Europeans as slaves or free men and women. African patterns, prominent in farming and defense, were also important in government, administration of justice, and religion. Many Maroon colonies adopted forms of Christianity, but allowed a number of competing religions to flourish. In some villages and families, mystic religions, like the one that I practice, played a vital part in the way people faced the terrible threats around them. To the surprise of Europeans, many Maroon colonies became successful, independent farming communities. Maroon foods were superior to European products and in great supply. Men and women in Maroon colonies and settlements were often described as healthy, tall, and muscular, a tribute to their diets and to their freedom. For some colonies, trade became a vital part of economic life. The prosperity of some Maroon colonies made them a subject of envy and then attacked by Europeans. These Maroons, most likely to face military assaults by invading armies, were situated on land Europeans wanted. Others were invaded because they were engaged in businesses whites sought to control. Black Indians in Venezuela in 1728, for example, ran a successful shipping operation Europeans wanted. In 1732, Spain sent out 250 soldiers to challenge the dark businessmen. Black Indian sharpshooters' musket fire then brought down all but 44 European soldiers. But Spain had not given up. It sent 1,500 troops after these Black Indians. And it still took them another 5 years to eliminate their dark business competitors. This is how our ancestors that were not satisfied with slavery as a permanent state of existence lived despite constant European, Caucasian, or white attempts to bring them back under white domination. We must go deep within our collective selves and find the courage to live independent of our enslavers in the tradition of our ancestors. This has been Darko Agabo Wakatu.